Upon finding my stepson occupied with an activity in his bedroom, I decided to lend a hand, an act that unexpectedly turned into an exhilarating experience I could never have foreseen. This all began on a peaceful Sunday afternoon, marked by an eerie quiet and a comforting sense of familiarity within the house. I had spent most of the day cleaning, immersing myself in small tasks to keep my mind busy. The house was mostly empty. My husband had left on a spontaneous fishing trip with friends, leaving the weekend unusually quiet. Kyle was upstairs in his room, the faint bass of his music drifting down to where I stood in the kitchen. It was rare for us to have the house to ourselves, but the relationship between Kyle and me had always been easy. Kyle was 22, and though he carried himself with the confidence of his age, he had a reserved side that occasionally surfaced. Over the years, I had come to appreciate the quiet bond we shared. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was steady and comforting. After finishing the dishes, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and stood by the kitchen window, letting the warmth of the sunlight wash over me. The quiet should have been calming, but instead, a restless energy stirred within me. It was the kind of feeling that made it hard to stay still, and after a moment, I decided to check on Kyle, whose music was still playing softly. When I reached the top of the stairs, his bedroom door was slightly open, allowing the sound to escape. I paused briefly, unsure whether to knock or leave him alone. However, an insatiable curiosity pushed me to approach. As I drew closer, preparing to call out to him, the sight through the small opening stopped me. Kyle was seated on the edge of his bed, his posture relaxed yet focused, his hands engaged in deliberate movements. I couldn't immediately grasp what he was doing, as his eyes remained fixed downward, his forehead slightly furrowed in concentration. My breath caught when I realized what was happening. The intimate nature of the scene compelled me to turn away, granting him the privacy he clearly thought he had. Yet, I remained frozen, caught between shock and fascination. The vulnerability of the moment, coupled with Kyle's apparent unawareness of the outside world, held me captive. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, casting gentle shadows that highlighted the contours of his face and shoulders. I knew I shouldn't be watching, but the sight of him so exposed and genuine sparked a deep curiosity within me. A question I couldn't ignore. Before I could gather my thoughts, Kyle glanced up, his eyes meeting mine through the narrow gap in the door. Time seemed to stand still. His expression shifted from surprise to a mix of embarrassment and uncertainty. His hands froze, and for a brief moment, neither of us moved, locked in a shared silence that felt endless. I tried to say something, anything, to ease the tension, but words failed me. My heart raced, a chaotic rhythm echoing in my ears. Kyle was the first to react, reaching for a nearby blanket to cover himself, his cheeks flushing a deep red. "I didn't think you'd come upstairs," he mumbled, his voice low and filled with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," I blurted out, sealing my own fate as I stepped back from the door. A burning sensation spread through me. "It was unintentional, and I don't know what to say," I added quickly, but Kyle raised his hand gently as if to stop me. "It's fine," he said hurriedly, though his voice trembled. "Just give me a minute." I nodded and retreated to the top of the stairs, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I regretted staying and watching, yet the image of Kyle, so vulnerable and unguarded, was etched indelibly in my mind. I stood there, gripping the banister, trying to steady my breathing as a flood of thoughts rushed through me, each more confusing than the last. I had never seen Kyle like this before. Not just physically, but emotionally. There was something in his expression that resonated deeply with me. Something indescribable yet impossible to ignore. Unbeknownst to me at the time, this moment had set in motion a series of events that would eventually lead to something thrilling. The sound of Kyle's door creaking open snapped me out of my thoughts. He stepped into the hallway, his movements hesitant, his eyes avoiding mine. He had put on a t-shirt and shorts, his usual casual attire, but his flushed cheeks and the palpable tension in his demeanor revealed his discomfort. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice quiet as he leaned against the doorframe. "I didn't mean for you to see that." "It's okay," I replied quickly, my voice softer than usual. "I should have knocked. I wasn't thinking." He nodded, his eyes briefly meeting mine before looking away again. I guess we're even now, he remarked with a faint, nervous laugh. Even? I asked, tilting my head in confusion. He shrugged, a small smile forming at the corner of his lips. You walked in on me and I walked in on you. Remember last summer when you forgot to lock the bathroom? The memory hit me suddenly, causing my cheeks to flush anew. I had completely forgotten about that incident. The brief awkwardness we had brushed off at the time. I guess you're right, I replied with a laugh, though my voice still carried a hint of nervousness. We're even. The tension between us seemed to ease slightly, the shared memory acting as a bridge between the awkwardness of the moment and the easy familiarity we had always shared. Yet, even as we laughed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. An unspoken tension lingering just beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. The laughter faded, leaving a heavy silence that felt different from before. Kyle leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed casually over his chest, but his posture hinted at an underlying tension. Unsure of how to respond, I briefly considered retreating downstairs to give him the space I had clearly invaded. Yet, the way his gaze flickered toward me, both hesitant and searching, compelled me to stay. It wasn't exactly discomfort. It was something softer, almost vulnerable, that made me remain where I was. I finally asked, my voice gentler than I meant it to be. Do you want to talk about it? Kyle's eyes widened slightly, and his cheeks turned red as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Talk about what exactly? He asked, his tone tinged with nervous humor. I gave a small smile, hoping to ease the tension. About anything. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I thought it might help. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor as he rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not sure, he admitted after a moment. It's kind of embarrassing. I moved closer carefully, my steps slow as if approaching a shy animal. Kyle, it's okay to feel embarrassed. Everyone has moments like that. His lips curved into a faint, self-conscious smile. Not everyone gets caught by their stepmom, though. The way he said it, half joking, half mortified, made me laugh softly, and to my surprise, his smile grew a little in response. I guess not, I agreed, leaning against the wall to mirror his posture. But if it makes you feel better, I've had plenty of awkward moments too. You're not alone. Kyle looked at me, his expression softening. Yeah, but you always seem so put together, like you've got everything under control. His words caught me off guard, stirring an unexpected ache. I'm not as composed as you think, I replied, my voice quieter now. Trust me, I've had my share of unsure moments too. He studied me for a second, his brow furrowing slightly as he tried to reconcile his image of me with the person standing in front of him. It's just weird, he said finally, his tone almost thoughtful. You're so different from Dad. Not in a bad way, just different. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I chose a gentler approach. Sometimes that can be a good thing. Kyle nodded, though he still seemed deep in thought. Yeah, he said after a pause. The quiet between us returned, but this time it felt lighter. I noticed the tension in Kyle's shoulders easing and the faint lines of worry around his eyes softening as he leaned against the doorframe. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said after a moment, his tone more serious. I wasn't really thinking. I guess I forgot you were home. It's okay, I said quickly, wanting to reassure him. It's not a big deal. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Kyle nodded, though he still avoided my gaze. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just hard to explain. I tilted my head slightly, my curiosity piqued. What's hard to explain? He hesitated, his fingers fiddling with the edge of his shirt. Being around people is just hard for me sometimes. I feel like I have to live up to some kind of standard, and when I don't, it feels like I'm doing something wrong. His words hit me harder than I expected, stirring a wave of empathy. Kyle, I said gently, taking a step closer. You don't have to be anything but yourself. You don't owe anyone, me, your dad, or anyone else, any kind of performance. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and searching, and for a moment I saw the vulnerability he usually kept hidden. Do you really mean that? He asked. I nodded firmly. You're a good person, Kyle. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. The corners of his mouth lifted into a small smile, and I saw the tension in his posture ease a little more. Thanks, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. You're welcome, I replied in the same quiet tone. We stood there in silence for a moment longer, the quiet between us now almost comfortable. I noticed the faint trace of a smile on Kyle's lips, and I felt relieved that he seemed to be feeling better. But even as the tension faded, I couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted between us. His gaze lingered a little too long, making my heart flutter in a way I couldn't explain. Finally, Kyle straightened up and pushed away from the doorframe, letting out a small sigh. I should probably do something productive, he said, his tone light but still carrying a hint of uncertainty. Take your time, I replied with a soft smile. There's no rush. He nodded, our eyes meeting briefly before he turned and went back into his room, the door closing softly behind him. I stayed there for a moment, staring at the closed door as a strange mix of emotions swirled inside me. I couldn't quite put a name to what I was feeling. Maybe confusion, maybe curiosity. But I knew that things between Kyle and me had changed in a way that couldn't be undone. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur as I tried to distract myself with small tasks. Folding laundry, sorting mail, anything to keep my mind off what had happened in the hallway. But no matter what I did, the memory of Kyle's expression and the vulnerability in his voice stayed with me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I told myself it was just a passing moment of awkwardness, something we'd both move past. But the more I tried to convince myself, the less I believed it. There was something in the way he had looked at me, so open, so unguarded, that stirred something deep inside me. By evening, I felt emotionally drained and settled onto the couch with a book, hoping to lose myself in a fictional world and escape the whirlwind of my thoughts. But the words on the page blurred together, and my attention kept drifting to the closed door at the top of the stairs. The sound of footsteps pulled me out of my thoughts, and I looked up to see Kyle coming down the stairs. His hair was slightly messy, as if he'd been lying in bed, and he had an air of uncertainty that made my chest tighten. I was going to make some tea, he said softly, pausing at the bottom of the stairs. The simplicity of the question surprised me, and I nodded before I could overthink it. That sounds nice. Thank you. Kyle went into the kitchen, and after a brief hesitation, I followed, drawn by the pull of his presence. When I walked in, he was already filling the kettle, his movements calm and deliberate. The soft hum of the boiling water filled the room, mingling with the quiet clink of cups as he set them on the counter. Do you still like honey in yours? He asked, glancing over his shoulder at me. Yes, please, I replied, leaning against the counter as I watched him. His tone was casual, but I couldn't help noticing the careful precision in his movements, as though he was trying to distract himself. We stood quietly for a moment, the space between us filled only by the sound of the kettle. I wanted to say something to ease the lingering tension that had hung in the air since earlier, but the right words escaped me. When the tea was ready, Kyle handed me a mug and leaned against the counter across from me. He took a small sip, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his cup. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, his voice calm but firm. I tilted my head slightly, waiting for him to continue. He explained that he had spent so much time trying to meet others' expectations that he had lost sight of his own desires. His words struck me deeply, and I set my mug down carefully, afraid my trembling hands might betray my emotions. Kyle, I said gently, it's okay to feel that way. It's normal to be unsure. You don't have to have all the answers right now. He seemed to understand, his gaze slowly meeting mine, but then he added, but what if I'm scared of figuring it out? What if I don't like what I find? The raw honesty in his voice tightened my throat, and I took a deep breath before responding. It's okay to be scared, I said, my voice shaking slightly. But you're stronger than you think. You don't have to face everything at once. Take it step by step and trust that you'll find your way. Kyle's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. You make it sound so easy, he said. It's not, I admitted, my smile tinged with sadness. But you're not alone. I'm here for you, no matter what. For a moment, he just looked at me, His gaze steady, and the vulnerability in his expression was almost too much to bear. I felt a strange, powerful pull in my chest, an ache I couldn't quite explain. "Thanks," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to thank me," I replied softly. "That's what family is for." Kyle nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful, as though there was more he wanted to say. I gave him the space to speak, but the moment passed, and he took another sip of his tea. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, weighed down by unspoken thoughts and emotions neither of us seemed ready to address. I wanted to reach out, to offer some kind of reassurance, but I wasn't sure what he needed, or if he even knew himself. Finally, Kyle straightened up and set his mug on the counter. "I think I'm going to head to bed," he said, his tone light but with a hint of hesitation. "Okay," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. "Good night, Kyle." "Good night," he answered, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before he turned and disappeared up the stairs. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time after he left, my thoughts a tangled mess of confusion and longing. The weight of the day pressed down on me, and I felt a strange mix of emotions: worry, tenderness, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. As I climbed the stairs to my own room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something had shifted between Kyle and me, something unspoken yet undeniable. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, I knew it would only grow stronger with time. But the story didn't end there. No, now the climax was coming. Let me tell you, the house was quiet again, but it felt different now. The air seemed heavier, as if the unspoken words between Kyle and me had seeped into the walls, lingering in every corner. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the soft rustle of the trees outside doing little to calm the restless energy churning within me. My thoughts kept circling back to Kyle. His expression, the vulnerability in his voice, the way his eyes had lingered on mine just a moment too long. There was something there, something I couldn't quite put into words, but it was undeniable. I rolled onto my side, closing my eyes in a futile attempt to will myself to sleep, but the silence only amplified my thoughts. After what felt like hours, I gave up. The stillness was suffocating, and I needed to move, to do something to shake the restless energy from my body. Slipping out of bed, I padded quietly down the hallway. The soft glow of moonlight spilled through the windows, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. I wasn't sure where I was going, but my feet seemed to move on their own, carrying me toward Kyle's room. His door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see the faint glow of a lamp spilling into the hallway. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest as I debated whether to knock. But before I could decide, I heard his voice, soft and almost hesitant. "You can come in," he said, his tone calm but with an edge of uncertainty. Swallowing hard, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Kyle was sitting on the edge of his bed, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. His hair was slightly messy, and the faint shadows under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping either. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked softly, leaning against the doorframe. He shook his head, offering a small, tired smile. "Too much on my mind, I guess." I nodded. "Me too." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was filled with the quiet hum of the lamp on his nightstand. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, but I wasn't sure how to break it, or if I even wanted to. "I've been thinking," Kyle said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence, "about what you said earlier, about not needing to meet anyone's expectations." I stepped further into the room, closing the door behind me. "What about it?" Kyle hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. "It's just hard to believe sometimes," he said, his voice faltering. "I feel like I've spent my whole life trying to be what other people want me to be, and I don't know how to stop." His words hit me like a wave, and I crossed the room to sit beside him on the bed. "Kyle," I said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. It's okay to take things one step at a time." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with uncertainty and something deeper, something that made my heart skip a beat. "What if I don't even know who I am without all of that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I squeezed his arm gently, my own emotions swirling as I tried to find the right words. You're still you, Kyle. The expectations don't define you. You're more than that, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Kyle's gaze lingered on mine, and I could feel the weight of his emotions in the air between us. You make it sound so simple, he said, his lips curving into a faint, wistful smile. It's not, I admitted, my voice quieter now. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. You're stronger than you think. For a moment, silence returned, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I could feel the warmth of his presence beside me, the soft hum of the lamp casting a gentle glow over the room. It was as if the rest of the world had faded away, leaving only the two of us in this shared moment. Thank you, Kyle said finally, his voice steady but laced with emotion. You don't have to thank me, I replied, my own voice soft. But even as the tension eased, I couldn't ignore the way his eyes lingered on mine, or the way my own heart raced in response. There was something unspoken between us, something I wasn't sure either of us was ready to confront. Shifting slightly, his hand brushed against mine as he adjusted his position. It was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a shiver through me, my breath catching in my throat. I don't know what I'd do without you, he said quietly, his gaze dropping to where our hands now rested side by side. You'll never have to find out, I replied, my voice trembling just slightly. Kyle looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine for something I couldn't quite name. The room felt impossibly still, the air between us charged with an energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. And in that moment, I knew that nothing between us would ever be the same. Kyle's eyes held mine, steady and searching, and I could feel the weight of his gaze in every corner of my being. My heart raced, each beat loud and insistent, echoing in my ears as the moment stretched between us. I should have looked away. I should have said something to ease the tension and return us to the comfortable familiarity we'd always shared. But I couldn't. I was frozen, caught in the intensity of his expression and the vulnerability and yearning I saw there. Kyle shifted slightly, his hand brushing against mine again, and this time neither of us moved away. The contact was electric, a jolt that sent a shiver down my spine and left my skin tingling. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a warmth rise in my chest that I couldn't ignore. You've always been there for me, Kyle said softly, his voice low and laced with emotion. Even when I didn't know how to ask for help. I don't think I've ever told you how much that means to me. His words swept over me like a powerful wave, and I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. Kyle, I said, my voice trembling slightly. You don't have to say that. You've always been important to me. I just want you to be happy. His lips curled into a faint, bittersweet smile. I don't know what happiness looks like for me yet, he admitted, his gaze dropping to where our hands still rested, fingers barely brushing. But I know that when I'm around you, I feel like I can figure it out. The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache, and I felt an overwhelming urge to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay. But as I opened my mouth to speak, I found that the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached out, my fingers curling gently around his hand. Kyle looked up at me then, his eyes wide and filled with something I couldn't quite name. I don't want to mess this up, he whispered softly. You're not going to mess anything up, I replied, my own voice soft and steady now. Let me help you with what you were busy with, Kyle. For a moment, neither of us moved, the silence between us heavy and charged. And then, slowly, Kyle leaned in, his movements hesitant, almost uncertain, as though he were waiting for me to stop him. I didn't. His lips tentatively touched mine, causing my heart to flutter. The kiss was soft, almost hesitant, but it sent a warmth spreading through me that I couldn't ignore. My hands moved instinctively, one resting on his arm while the other cupped his face, my fingers brushing against the faint stubble on his jaw. For a moment, the rest of the world fell away. There was no sound, no light, no time, just the warmth of his lips against mine. the steady thrum of my heartbeat, and the overwhelming sense of connection that filled the space between us. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads resting against each other, I felt a rush of emotions that I couldn't begin to untangle. There was confusion, yes, and fear, but also a deep, undeniable sense of brightness that I couldn't explain. I had helped him, and I could see that he enjoyed it, but still, I felt regret. "Kyle," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is—" He cut me off quickly, his voice trembling slightly. "I know it's complicated. I just needed you to know how I feel." My chest tightened at his words, and I exhaled shakily, my hands still resting against his arms. "This isn't something we can take lightly," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "I'm not," he replied, his tone earnest. "I've thought about this a lot. I've tried to ignore it, to push it away, but I can't. You're the one person who makes me feel like I can be myself." His honesty was both heartbreaking and comforting, and I felt a pang of guilt for the emotions that stirred within me. This was unfamiliar territory for me, and I wasn't sure how to proceed. However, as I gazed into his eyes, it became clear to me that I couldn't overlook what was happening between us. "I care about you, Kyle," I finally said, my voice shaking a little more than I intended. "More than you probably realize. But we need to be careful. We have to think about what this means." He nodded, his eyes staying locked on mine. "I just don't want to lose this. Whatever this is. I don't want it to go away." "It doesn't have to," I replied softly, my hands dropping to rest in my lap. "But we need to take it slow. We have to be sure." Kyle nodded again, his face a mix of determination and vulnerability. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," he said quietly. The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache, and I gave him a small, tentative smile. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice steady. "Together." Kyle's lips curved into a faint smile, and for the first time that evening, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The tension that had filled the room seemed to ease, replaced by a quiet understanding. While things might not be simple, we would face them together. As I stood to leave, Kyle reached out, his fingers brushing against mine in a silent gesture of connection. I looked back at him, my heart swelling with emotions I couldn't fully name, and I squeezed his hand gently before stepping out into the hallway. It felt quieter now, the heaviness in the air seeming to lift. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but as I made my way back to my room, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't expected. Whatever came next, we would face it together.